Yeah, and that's something actually that I'd love you to touch on as well is kind of the dose response relationship to maybe certain flexion based movements, like let's say a Jefferson curl or maybe a deficit stiff leg deadlift, where we don't have, there's not an egregious amount of spinal flexion, but let's say there's some spinal flexion coming in the thoracic versus the low back. And if you could kind of differentiate between those degrees, I guess.
Well, we know that some people do fine with flexing their back and other people don't. So, are we talking specifically about power lifters or just flexing in general, or what are we talking about?
You know what? Just do whatever you want. Powerlifters, and then just kind of go off on a tangent.
Okay, and then restate the question for me, just so I can have it clear.
Yeah, so talking about the degrees of freedom, I guess, that you
Got
can
it.
have in terms of spinal flexion, and then also where the flexion's occurring, if it's segmental or more global and evenly distributed, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. So, when we're talking about, let's start with training. Some people can move their back just fine. Some people start with like a flexion moment, and then they keep it locked in there, kind of like you've seen with I don't know who kind of pulls like that. KK used to pull like that,
Like KK. Yeah.
and yeah, he put a lot of torque on his back and compression and such. But the worst is the movement under load, according to the science. It's the movement under the heavy compression and load. But the moment isn't quite as bad. Some people have flexion moments all the time and they're fine. Um, some people they can flex their back like crazy and they're good for a long time. Other people have just a little bit of a micro movement and they blow a disc apart. So I see a lot more people successfully with thoracic flexion than people with a really kinked up spine in the lumbar that you see like on the. Or how old are you? Okay,
34.
do you remember that guy Diesel Weasel or whatever his name was that was always pulling with the super rounded back or whatever his name was? He would always post videos like trying to blow his back apart, and his back every time would be completely rounded over. And anyway, he was when the forums were new, he was always posting his videos for people to critique him, and he looked like he was trying to kill his lower back. So anyway, my point is, some people, their back is bulletproof. Like that one guy deadlift. Who is the guy on Instagram now that pulls from those six like 3 feet negative deadlift from a deficit? Have you seen that? There's
No.
a guy on there's a guy on Instagram now that pulls from a deficit that's like over 2 feet, and he has to reach all the way down with his arms and past his toes to grab the bar, and he stiff legs it and all this stuff. Some people are touched by the hand of God, and they can flex. Other people can't do so much. Now, for rehab, some people can, let's say they're flexion intolerant. Any type of flexion really causes them a lot of pain. Those are the people that shouldn't be deadlifting with that type of back. Okay. Now, the people that it doesn't hurt them and they can do a bunch of like extension, cranking their back on their facet joints, they're fine, or flexing forward and they're fine on the deadlift, then I don't think that's bad for them. But until that start causes pain, so be it. If they pull the best that way, they can do that, but they might pay for that a little bit later. So for the rehab aspect of it, if they're having pain, um, deadlifting with that type of form, or those movements cause them pain, some people have a lot of people actually have the mindset of progressive overload. Maybe you remove flexion for a little bit and then you start slowly adapting to flexion again. The only problem that I see with that and experiences with clients that come to me is the loaded people have problems with that. Now, the everyday person that just wants to be able to flex forward a little bit, that aren't trying to load their spine, those people do pretty good with that sometimes. Now, the people that are lifting again, that are trying to get back to flexion under load, those people don't typically do that good. Now, going back to a point that I made earlier, I don't see these people that recover from microdosing their flexion, extension, and rotation versus the way that we have the remove the cause, let it desensitize, then slowly get back to jujitsu or wrestling or football or powerlifting or strongman. That's the way we approach it. So when people come to me, they've already tried the microdosing, the flexion, or doing the McKenzie press ups and extension. Um, this stuff made them worse or it didn't work for them. Now there are people that it works for them, but I never see them because they've gotten fixed. I see the people this all fails for. So generally, their rehab will be focused on the things they can do well that don't cause them pain. And depending on what their end goal is, if they're a real flexible athlete or a stiffened one like a powerlifter, I'll tailor their program to to meet the demands of their sport. But then you have some people in the middle, like a UFC fighter or like a Green Beret or a SEAL. So I've had people that have blew their back out doing the sit up time test. And that's a really tough one on a bigger guy that has a bigger spine. That's a lot of stress on the disc after running with a rucksack and then doing, 60, 70 sit ups in 1 minute. So sometimes they need to get a surgery. Sometimes I can fix them, but they still have to face that sit up test. So what we do is we train them statically to build endurance, whether it be planks, stir the pot. We'll have them do some sit-ups at like 30, 40, 50%. So they might do sets of 20 or something instead of sets of 70. And then we'll just make sure that their psoas and their hip flexors are ready for it. And they won't do more than 20 sit-ups at one time, then bust out 75 because their core is so endurable and strong. And then they don't have to worry about the test again. So there's all kinds of different ways where we have to do a little bit of flexion and extension for them to get ready for their test, but we don't train them that way and beat them to death with these things that end up being their poison. But for someone else, they can flex, extend, rotate their back forever. That's great. They're not a back patient of mine. They're not a back client. So each person's unique, but if flexing their back hurts them, we stay away from that for a while. And then depending on what their sport is, their demands are, once it's healed and not so sensitized, they can go back to flexing their back. How long is that? Everyone's different.
Yeah, I like how you provided a lot of context around that as well, because I think that's something that is a bit difficult. When you hear opposing viewpoints and you're like, they both make really, really good points, but they're not mutually exclusive. Like you said, it's like some people have, basically an unlimited tolerance to flexion and they'll never get injured and they're just, blessed. Other people are fine until they're not. And, then they just blow their back out lifting a fucking water bottle.
Exactly. I see the people that blew their back out petting their dog and they're crying on the couch crippled and they have a disc bulge that's gigantic on the MRI, and that's when it seemingly happened. But, I'm a McGill practitioner. I don't walk around, trying to do flexion all the time because that was one of my pain generators. But, dude, flexion is fine for me. It doesn't cause me pain. My back's not exploding. All right. But I am a bigger guy. Mm-hmm. And if I want to start poking and prodding on those discs, maybe if I did it enough, it would sensitize me again. But if I have a flexion moment or moving flexion sometimes, it's not the end of the world. But for some people, they would argue with you and say, absolutely, flexion kills me. I don't ever want to, flex my back again. Well, you're going to need to flex your back again at some point, but I understand that's your pain generator, so you want to stay away from it for a bit. But man, everyone's unique with their mechanisms, so there is no one size fits all program. And I think coming full circle to why the doctor and physical therapist and everyone else fails is they have a cookie cutter. When they do spend time with you, it's a cookie cutter program. McKinsey press ups. Well, McKinsey press ups for someone that has a disc bulge and they have 80% of their disc height that hasn't gotten smaller or degenerated a little bit. Those people, as long as they have the facet space, they can pull some of their disc material back in sometimes. But the person that isn't as blessed as them, they can end up ruining their facet joints for a couple of years doing all the press ups every day. So for someone that is flexion intolerant, that extension feels good, press ups can help. But if you do them too much, they can end up causing a backlash. So what we advocate is somewhere in the middle. Maybe here on your stomach instead of all the way up into your maybe one fist or two fists. So you still get a little bit of shrinking the disc bulge, but without the bad stuff. So we do stretching, we do McKinsey stuff, we do all kinds of art. And some people do adjustments with the McGill method, but it's about using the correct tool for the problem that you have at hand and not just having a dogma like, oh yeah, you have a disc bulge, you do this, this, and this. The big three in walking, you're going to be fine. Well, it's not the way it works.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so